Welcome to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief of thenationalpulse.com. It's an historic day here in Washington, D.C., an historic day in Jerusalem, an historic day in Manama, an historic day in Abu Dhabi, and really an historic day for all peace-loving people around the world. The Arab-Israeli conflict has consumed a region in the world for decades. It has consumed civilizations for generations, and it has consumed lives, livelihoods, and countless man-hours, days, weeks, months, years, and decades of those trying to change things for the better. It took President Trump and his team less than one term in office to achieve something truly historic and something that can truly change the world for the better. Whether this new peace deal lasts is a matter for the parties involved and will reflect on the commitment of those who care enough to love their children more than they may hate their neighbors. And while something like the Middle East peace process may seem remote to people outside of the Washington, D.C. Beltway or in the foreign policy establishments around the world, it cannot be overstated just what a greatly historic moment today was, and how much of a direct impact it will have on so many lives around the world. I just want to reflect on those moments from earlier today for a moment.
The President of the United States.
Absolutely amazing. And while the media warned us that President Trump would inevitably drag the Western world into a third world war, a nuclear holocaust or similar, the reality has been the total opposite. I want to make sure that we take stock here of what we saw taking place today. I want to make sure that we take stock of everything that this president has achieved in such a small amount of time. I mean, for your friends and family who still regard Trump as a warmonger or a boorish and bumbling oaf who doesn't know what's what on the domestic nor on the world stage, show them that clip. Remind them that it has been 26 years since the last significant peace accords were signed, and that was between Israel and Jordan. That was when Bill Clinton was the president. That was before most people in the modern foreign policy establishment were old enough to vote. And the ramifications of such a moment should have long-standing domestic implications too. You know, they told us America first meant America only, whereas we know now that that was simply not true. We knew it back then as well. Think of all the anger and hatred and fear the media and the Democrats have promoted, not just in their quest for power or in their fealty for globalism, but because they were desperate for Trump to be wrong and desperate for you to be scared. In that endeavor, the media has caused serious damage to the United States, both at home and to the US image overseas. When videos of Kenosha and Portland and Chicago and Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. and New York play on the television screens of foreign media outlets around the world scratches their heads and the world loses confidence in America. And you may not care what the world thinks about America. You'd be well within your rights to feel that way. But when the world loses confidence in America, the world looks for confidence elsewhere. And over the past few years, the malign influence of the media has pushed some of the world into the arms of the Chinese Communist Party, an evil entity which expressly wants the full and total gutting of the United States to further its own power-hungry goals. And when the media heaps a ton of unwarranted criticism on the president and his supporters, routinely demonizing them, allowing the likes of Nancy Pelosi to call them enemies of the state, unchallenged, well then, bad things happen. Really bad things happen. You know what happened to Senator Rand Paul there. And recently, Congressman Paul Gosar was on the receiving end of some violent death threats from an unhinged leftist who left this message on his voicemail. Apologies for the disjointedness of this clip, as we've had to cut out a lot of the swearing. Let's roll it.
So the way I see it, since you support a child rapist who has 65 years of crimes, and you are doing about COVID, and I've had people die, I think it's totally okay for me to come with my gun and shoot you in the head. That's what we think of you, Mr. Gosar. You're a murderer supporter, and you are just going down. Murderer, murderer, murderer supporter, you are going down. And we'll make sure we send you lots of protesters your way, too. You're a real big piece of
Unreal. And a direct result of the media and Democratic attacks on Republicans, unpersoning them, othering you. And the congressman is lucky in a sense that he's a congressman and that the Capitol Hill police will look after him. And they should the worst happen. The same can't be said for the rest of us who seemingly take our lives into our hands every time we publicly wear our politics or our philosophical perspectives on our sleeves. We get attacked, threatened, abused, and our livelihoods destroyed by the mob. And why? Because some foreign policy establishment soy boy sitting in a K Street suite in Washington, D.C. is mad at the president because the president's foreign policy doesn't enrich him like Obama's did, or like Bush's did, or like decades upon decades of foreign policy establishments did. You see, for these people, war is profit, nothing else. An unstable world gives them a raison d'etre. Without it, they'd be just another legal assistant in some law firm somewhere, a teaching aide in a community college, and nothing against those jobs. But for them, they think they're too big for that, too smart for that, too important for that. And it's your sons and daughters that have to die for it. It's your taxes that have to underwrite it. It's America that has to be destabilized at home because Trump is bringing stability to the rest of the world. Our guest today is Congressman Paul Gosar from Arizona's 4th District, who I'll ask about the violent threats against his life, his thoughts on the historic peace process, Joe Biden's immigration policies, and a whole lot more. This is the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, and we'll be right back. Did you hear her yesterday, Kamala Harris and the Harris administration? Did you hear Joe Biden today said the Harris-Biden administration? Doesn't that just go right to the heart of what we've been talking about all along? Congressman Paul Gosar joins us down the line now from Arizona. We're really, really grateful for the time today, Congressman. Thank you so much for joining us here on the National Pulse.
My pleasure, Raheem. Anytime.
Well, Congressman, first questions first. I mean, what an historic day. And you juxtapose it with Joe Biden giving a speech out in Tampa, very clearly squinting at the teleprompter. He's trying to figure out what it says. And he inevitably mixes up Iraq and Iran. He says American troops died in Iran and Afghanistan. Meanwhile, you have the president there making just some extraordinary foreign policy moves on the White House lawn. Your thoughts, Congressman?
Well, this is when you look at the whole perspective. Trump was supposed to be this aloof, like you said earlier, in the Middle East and foreign policy, and yet here he makes the Obama administration look infantile in regards to accomplishments. UAE, Bahrain, that is unprecedented, and to see those four men walking down equally standing is a sight to be seen. It goes back to that whole process, loving peace more than you hate your enemy, and loving your children. You could say that about the United States right now, but this president has really matured. He's put the right people in the right places. Mike Pompeo is the right guy. He makes John Kerry look, like I said, infantile.
I think that's the right word, infantile. I mean, you'd think about the foreign policy soy boys that I was talking about in the monologue, and Ben Rhodes immediately pops into mind, one of the architects of the Iran deal. I mean, just how, from your perspective, from a legislator's perspective, just how much of a gaping chasm is there between the realist, peace-orientated foreign policy of the Trump administration and the bowing and kowtowing and handing over cash and begging the world and apologizing for America of the Obama administration?
Well, and you take that, Raheem, being that we allowed Iran to chase its dreams and achieve its dreams. It took Donald Trump, somebody that stood fast on principles, to say, no, you're not going to go collect $200 and get a nuclear weapon. That's the best deterrent, peace through strength. And I think Donald Trump has actually done that. He's trusted because he delivers on his promises. When have you seen a politician do that? It's unheard of. Maybe back to the Reagan era. But I mean, what he's done doing is a mess that's been left to him by decades and decades of misuse on the foreign affairs. The money being invested in George Soros, for example, rewriting Alinsky's rules for radicals in the native languages of different people, using our USAID money for that. I mean, it shows you a lack of respect for other entities, but also a disrespect for American greatness.
Absolutely. Congressman, last question on this before I pivot. I want to get your thoughts on the threats that you've received as a result of how the Democrats and the media have treated you. But I just want to get your thoughts on this peace accord very quickly, because I think it's fair to say that of all the America First people out there, you definitely rank in the top, right? You are America First through and through. I think it's fair to say, and you've received a lot of criticism for that. And one of the criticisms has often been that America First is an isolationist worldview. But today surely shows us that that is just not true. America First means America First, but there is a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6 in terms of prioritization, is there not?
It absolutely is, because we had our, for example, NATO. We actually had NATO allies taking advantage of us and the American taxpayer footing all the bill instead of honoring the promises and contracts. That's what this president's good about, is listening to the public, finding out what that problem is, and engaging to a contract and holding people accountable. Magically, things happen when you do that. But that's part of the problem here, is that there's a status quo of what they want and the hold on power. And when you get somebody like Donald Trump who's not beholden to any of them, it causes a ripple. Same thing with me. I'm not beholden to anybody. I listen to the people back home. I don't run from being a dentist. I run to being a dentist. I listen to what's on the street, what's the problem, and they stay shut up so that the patient or the constituent can tell me the solution, because America gets it. Unlike the media and others, America does get it, and they like and they approve of trust. Trust is a series of promises kept, and that is as simple as the magic that Paul Gosar and Donald Trump actually exhibit.
I'm very glad you said it like that, because I think it's so true. And for the people that don't follow you and follow your work, I just cannot recommend enough making sure that you're a part of Congressman Dr. Paul Gosar's social media pages, Facebook page, his Twitter, his Parler, and making sure you're keeping up to date, because a lot of where the MAGA agenda sees upon action-orientated things is in people like Congressman Dr. Paul Gosar. We've got to go to a quick break now, Congressman, but when we come back, I want to get your reaction to the violent threat that was left on your voicemail. Shocked me when I first heard it. I'm sure it will shock a lot of the audience out there as well. This is the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, thenationalpulse.com if you like our work, /support. When we come back, Congressman Gosar. We'll be back in just a second. I was just chatting with Congressman Gosar, who's a dentist, in the break about this fleecing that a dentist in DC wants to do to me. He says, I've got to have implants in the back and they want to charge something extraordinary for that. We'll get into it another time. Congressman, you can give me your opinion on that. Yeah. Look, really, it's just phenomenal to me how people like you who serve your country and who go out there every day and get threats, and that you can still just have a laugh and joke around, because so much of life now for us on the political right is about getting threatened, about getting punched, about getting censored, and you're no different. This voicemail we played in the monologue at the beginning of the show was stunning to me when I heard it, not least because you've got to figure, if you're this person leaving this voicemail on a congressman's phone, that you're going to get caught, right? That the law is going to catch up to you. So, Congressman, just tell us how it all began and where we are now with this.
Well, I think what you're seeing is the repercussions of lawlessness in Washington, D.C. You look at my career in Congress for the last 10 years. What have I had to put up with? Fast and Furious, Benghazi, the IRS, the unmasking, the emails for Clinton, Russiagate, Ukrainegate, and then also now Obamagate. No one's been held accountable. Then you start looking at the Democratic mayors across the country, whether it be San Francisco, Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago, New York, where we allow people to loot up to $1,000 and in some cases $1,500 with barely a slap on the wrist and no felonies. And now what you're going to say is all of a sudden, it's irrespectful. You turn people loose. No, what you're doing is you're ginning people up to be unaccountable. What you're ginning up is you're calling names. And what ends up happening, you're taking that person that you heard on that phone line, ginning them up to a point where they actually unrationally are saying, listen, I'm going to threaten you. We're going to take your life. That's how much disregard they have for the rule of law and accountability. But that's been bred into our society over the last 8 years of the Obama administration. And what Donald Trump now has is a DOJ that's ransacked full of people that are part of the problem, not part of the solution. So this goes with the territory. In your monologue, you said that the Capitol Police will follow up. Well, maybe they have and maybe they haven't. The only reason we had the intervention at the softball or the baseball game was because Steve Scalise was there, who had mandatory two-guard Capitol Police with him. Otherwise, there would have been no Capitol Police, and there would have been bloodshed all over the place. But this just shows you how the left and the media are so intolerant of me having a voice on my First Amendment. And they're willing to take everything out. But it also shows you how desperate they are. If Donald Trump is reelected, we take back the House and the Senate. Think about their world. Their world goes away.
It's not just your voice as well. I mean, it's the voice of your constituents, right? They're the ones that have sent you to Washington, D.C. to represent them. And now you've got this psychopath calling you up and threatening to shoot you in the head. So, I mean, do we know who this person was? Do we have any background? Like, is there any latest?
So she's a former first grade teacher of all things. Here's somebody that works with small kids that should know better. My understanding is she's retired. She's from Glendale. And that's about as much credibility as we'll give her, But I'm a believer in the Second Amendment, and that's how the West was won. That's how the rule of law came to be. And if you want to play by that, be willing to part that way.
Well, we have seen some of the protesters in recent days winning stupid prizes for playing stupid games, falling off the tops of police cars and so on and so forth. So, let me ask you this. In your estimation, are things looking better than they were a month or so ago when there was really a trepidation of pushing back? People were fearful of saying anything. People were scared of not putting their fists up at these DC restaurants and saying Black Lives Matter because the mob was surrounding them and harping on at them and trying to cajole them into certain behaviors. I mean, that's fascism on the streets of Washington, D.C. As far as I'm concerned. Are things getting any better?
No, and I think they're going to get worse, Raheem, to be honest with you, in the next 50 days or whatever it is to the election. But, that doesn't give us the willpower not to continue forward. Because people get their strength when true leaders step forward. What's the old adage about, evil prevails when good people do nothing? Well, you elected me to be your voice, to lead you, to be responsible and accountable. I can't let this stuff go. I've got to call it out. And this is really personal to me because I have 7 siblings who disagree with me vehemently, who have even taken out videos against me and for my opponent. But the good news is it shows you that you can stand for something and still win. Hands down 70-30, even with that aspect. And who got the bull into that aspect? My siblings. And if you think I run away from it, think again. I run to it. I share this. If I can do it, so can you. And so what you do is you empower that entrepreneurial, that rebellious spirit of America out there. If you think about this, the fastest growing segment of the population buying guns are women with children. They feel insecure. That's the whole thing. This is intimidation from the left. And what you have to do is you have to fight this with the willpower to say, listen, I'm not standing for this. We stand for law and order and accountability. And most Americans want that, believe in that, and want to enhance that.
Walk toward the fire, as Andrew Breitbart used to say.
Absolutely.
Are you an enemy of the state?
Well, according to Nancy Pelosi, I am. And if it's a state of California, I guess I'm those are nice, kind words. But that's not what she's saying. She's saying I'm a criminal against the Constitution. But it's her interpretation of the Constitution. She wants the big state, the nanny state. I believe in a small government empowering people, not victimizing people. And those are words unbecoming of a speaker. And what we ought to be looking at is looking at and defining her presence and her accountability. That's why a number of us are actually pushing the minority to ask for a motion to vacate the chair. Because she needs to be held accountable for her actions. what's happening now in Congress is her way or the highway. And I wonder if there's 30 to 35 Democrats on hot seats that would have a hard time voting for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. I just wonder.
So what is that?
God
just
gave
very
us all
quickly
these.
before we break. We got 30 seconds before we break, but just explain that to us. So you put a motion to vacate the chair, and then everyone has to vote on that?
Yeah, they moved to table it, and then we asked for a roll call vote. So to table it shows you that there's Democrats that don't want her or would want her that are now voting for her that would have to stand up in their district and say, why did you vote for Nancy Pelosi a second time? She showed that she's not proficient and shouldn't be in that position. Now you hold it accountable. So this gives us another tool in the toolbox to make sure that America knows who's on their side and who's on the side of big government and bad government.
Wow. Okay, Congressman Gosar, I'll hold that thought. One more segment with you. I'm really grateful for your time. I want to ask you about Joe Biden's immigration plan. I want to talk to you about the Green New Deal and what they're doing in California at the moment, what impact it's having, and the Transition Integrity Project. What are your thoughts on that? Congressman Gosar returns with me in just a second. Well, Joe Biden's immigration plan is something that I don't think we're talking about enough. I think it's fair to say that Congressman Gosar is an immigration hawk, proudly an immigration hawk. I share those sentiments with you, Congressman, and I wonder why neither our side nor the media is picking up on what Joe Biden's immigration plans actually are, because when you run the numbers, for me it looks like he's effectively trying to welcome another 77 million odd people into the country. Now, the way I arrive at that number for people who are unaware is the amnesty that Biden, under a Harris-Biden administration, as he said, is going to bring in. Now, the official number that keeps getting used is 11 million. We know it's nowhere close to that. The Yale study said it was 22 million. And then the White House says an average immigrant brings in 3.5 people alongside them at some point down the line. This chain migration. So you're really looking at tens of millions of people if Joe Biden gets his way, Congressman. What say you?
Absolutely. And I think at 22 million people, you're still underestimating it, because I've seen the studies that show it's closer to 32 to 34 million. And you're right. You know, when you bring in family aspects, boy, the trajectory totally changes America, the dynamics. If you think about just even DACA in the last election and allow the DACA recipients just to vote in the states that they reside in, just take Arizona, Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina. Let them vote in that last election. You have President Hillary Clinton, not President Donald Trump. That's how big the swing is. It changes the dynamics totally in the United States. And so am I for immigration? Yes, lawful immigration. That's up to par that the country allows to come in. But illegal immigration, that's a violation of the very sovereignty that you are seeking, is that you're violating the rule of law when you're chasing the rule of law. It's a dichotomy that can't go unnoticed.
I think that's right. Look, we're very grateful for your time. I won't take up too much more of it, but while I have you, just two more things. What's taking place out west at the moment? I mean, you saw the clip of some guy yesterday saying to the president, you know, the science says this, and then Joe Biden comes in, tweets, science says it is the way it is, you know. They totally disregard actual scientific method. I mean, you're a doctor. And then, you know, Scientific American comes out today, says, oh, in our 175-year history, we've never endorsed a presidential candidate, but we're endorsing Joe Biden. There's only one problem with that. Scientific American isn't American. It's owned by a publisher out of Stuttgart in Germany. So who cares what Scientific American thinks?
Well, and go to Germany, they pay one of the highest rates for kilowatt hour because they gotten rid of all the above energy policy. But that's what's crazy about California is they were 5,000 megawatts short this summer. So they had to buy some of the most expensive electricity because they had very little electricity. And then when you start looking at the burning forest fires, and climate change, maybe it dried out, but it's our mismanagement of our forests. And so what ends up happening when a typical fire would be in the grasslands, now it's into the trees, this catastrophic canopy fires that burn intensely and they explode. They're so dry they just explode and they send everything going crazy. This is nothing new, and if you look back at history of the Earth's aspects, we go through these cycles of dryness and wetness because cut down a tree, look at the tree rings. It tells you the whole history of that tree's life. You'll see shorter rings closer together. That means that it was drier. Big rings where there's good growth because there was lots of sunlight and a lot of nutrients and a lot of water. You know, out west, you know, we drink water because water's for fighting over. I mean, we drink whiskey, because water's for fighting over. So we get that. And so it's really sad. One day, just an example, one day of catastrophic wildfires puts more contaminants in the atmosphere than a full year of that state's emissions from cars and trucks and stuff. It's amazing people don't think about this. You know, and this is not just carbon monoxide and carbon, but also heavy metals that are incorporated by the filters called trees and grasses. So those are many times over. So we're seeing the suffering of what the Green New Deal would be. So America, if you like what California's going, go Democrat. If you don't, there's only one ticket, and it's called Republican.
Well, I've never fought over water, Congressman, but I've had my fair share of whiskeys up there in Prescott. As you know, one of my favorite places in the world is Prescott, Arizona. Just finding, but where Barry Goldwater gave his speech in 1963. Well, look, I want to just ask you very quickly in the last couple of minutes here, this Transition Integrity Project, we broke the news on this on the National Pulse on August the 3rd. It caught a lot of people on the political right unaware. I wanted to ask you, just how aware you and your office are of this coup attempt, the background information to it, and what, if anything, Republican lawmakers are doing to make sure that Joe Biden and his Harris administration are not going to steal the election between November the 4th and January the 19th.
Well, so what we did, Raheem, we were ahead of the curve. What we did after the last election, we actually brought our recorders from each of the counties and said, listen, what were some of the problems that you entailed? So I'll give you an example. Mojave County, the recorder sent out the requested early ballots. All of a sudden, they started barely trickling in when that's unusual. Most of them are returned very quickly. So what she did is she started looking at Kingman and Bullhead City and Lake Havasu, and she still couldn't find the hang-up. So what did she do? She goes to Henderson and she goes to Las Vegas. She finds piles of them. So what stops the postal workers from forwarding those on? These are just a tip of the iceberg. You know, one of the guys that I talked to on the advance team for the Trump administration basically said, I
want to make it.
The person that actually owned the property before him actually got a ballot, and he hadn't been there for 5 years, and that showed up in the primary. So, and then you take a look at Los Angeles. They were mandated by the courts, by Judicial Watch suit, to remand 1.5 million people off the voter rolls. That's still not been done. So what we've got to do is we have to make sure that we have poll watchers, people out there having our recorders looking and sizing up the voter rolls right as we speak, and demanding that those that have died are not eligible to vote, don't vote. We got to make sure that it's now hand-to-hand combat and making sure that everybody follows through with that.
Well, Congressman, I want to thank you again for joining us here on the show today. We're out of time, unfortunately, but just open invite whenever you want to come back. You're a fan favorite with me. You're a fan favorite with this audience here on America's Voice and on the National Pulse. Also, Congressman Gosar, just thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thanks, Raheem. Stand for something or fall for everything.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Congressman Gosar is just such a great inspiration to so many people out there. I'm always pleased to bump into him, whether it's at conferences or here on Capitol Hill. Not here on Capitol Hill, we're downtown right now, but on Capitol Hill where the War Room is, for instance, and we're just ever so grateful for his time, his work, his efforts. Make sure you're following him on social media. This is the National Pulse. Make sure you're following us on social media if you're not. I'll be back with my next guest in just a moment. This is today's Financial Times. Got to read the Financial Times if you want to know what the left and the globalists are thinking. But I'm ahead of the Financial Times for today, and I'll tell you why. Page 3. You've heard me now talk day in and day out about the Transition Integrity Project, but I started going through some of their source materials this past weekend. Now I want to read you page 3. It's prime placement in the Financial Times, right? This is the financial and economic world's paper of choice, way beyond the Wall Street Journal, anything else. Financial Times, all right? So, page 3, fears grow over Trump refusing to concede. Talks about civil unrest, etc., etc. Then 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs into this story. Edward Foley at Ohio State, who has studied the vulnerabilities in the U.S. election system, has said both sides have defined the election as an existential test for the country, which would make it hard to concede defeat. It goes on to quote Foley. Remember yesterday, I talked about that book, Ed Foley's book, the Ballot Battles book, and where the Transition Integrity Project is really hinging a lot of its work. And it is right there, circled by me in the Financial Times today. So congratulations, everybody who watches this show. You're days and days ahead of the news cycle. I want to get to our next guest. who will want to talk to you exactly about this steal, this big steal that's going on right now. Matthew Taylor is a filmmaker, a very trendy man, as you can see from it's the t-shirt and blazer combo and the hairstyle. Matt, nobody would think you were a frothing at the mouth conservative, but you do make conservative movies, and I mean, I would say that they don't even necessarily need to be conservative, but they are born out of a love for your country, I think, and we'll get into two of them. You've got two movies out right now. So one is Safeguard, which is about the Electoral College. It's very clear from the Transition Integrity Project's report, which I carry everywhere with me. This goes everywhere with me. It goes to bars, it goes to nightclubs, it goes hunting with me. The Transition Integrity Project's report itself states on page 3, they like page 3, different page 3 in England, it says, TIP recognizes and shares the view that the Electoral College is profoundly anti-democratic and that numerous long-standing practices also function to create structural biases in our voting system. Matthew, they're coming after the Electoral College, they're coming after it hard. Why is your movie out right now so important?
Well, look, the Electoral College is one of those things that people don't have to think about very often. They think about it every 4 years. It's been around a long time. People don't understand how it functions or why it was brought about. And so what this film does is it lays out the basic principles of why the Electoral College was designed, how it was designed, and how it's implemented to basically protect minority rights. And of course, the problem is you have a couple of elections where the popular vote and the electoral vote don't line up. And so people call for its abolishment. But again, there's a lot of things that if you were to abolish the system, you would be hurting how the country functions. You know, we are not, in fact, a democracy. We are a republic. And so that is a very different system than a pure democracy, say like France. And so again, the film is designed to first set the stage of why it's here and then talk about what would happen if you took it away.
So what would happen if you took it away?
Well, you know, a couple things would happen. Right now, if you have a pure democracy in this country, right, let's take 2016, for example. You had roughly 135 million people vote. And out of that 135 million people, you have roughly 30 to 35 million people who are minorities, 16.5 million African Americans, maybe 12.5 million Hispanics, and then everybody else. If you had a popular vote that was direct, you would need no minorities to win the presidential election. You could win it with only white people, right? And so what it does is it takes these minority groups, and not just racial minorities, but sexual minorities, economic minorities, and it gives them a voice because there is democracy within each state. Everybody votes. So if you have a 49-49 split in a state, that minority vote could be the tipping point, and it gives them the voice. Otherwise, if you're only 16.5 million people out of 135 million people, you have no voice and you're not needed. Not to mention there's geographic issues. You could run only in New York City and Los Angeles and Chicago, and you could cancel out many, many other states. And so what this does is it essentially makes it so that a candidate has to go to states all over the country and engage with people of all sorts of different jobs and ilks of all sorts, and win their vote, and then win that state. And by the end of it, you have to win a majority of those states, and then you become the president. And so without this system, you could just ignore large groups of people, and that is why the Electoral College was designed the way it is designed.
Sorry, I wasn't smirking at what you were saying. I was smirking because a message pops up on my screen from the CEO of the network. He says, he looks like a frothing at the mouth conservative to me. Matthew, in the next, he must be meeting some very dapper conservatives. In the next segment, I want to get to your next movie, Riding the Dragon, and what that's all about. But I just want to ask you this. I don't know how much of our reporting you followed about the Transition Integrity Project, but what do you have to say to Rosa Brooks and George Soros and Ian Bassin and Ed Foley and all these people who are trying to remove the Electoral College from the United States?
Look, if you disassemble the Electoral College, you are also breaking down our federalist system. right? We are a federalist system, which means states are independently sovereign from the federal government, and they have a relationship. By breaking down that system, you break down our ability for one person to be. Remember, the president is an executive. He doesn't make the law. That's Congress and Senate. That's their job. He is just there to execute the law. So by taking away this system, you break apart basically the fundamental checks and balances that hold this system together, and you will have mass chaos and disaster. And of course, the movie lays out a number of other things I didn't even get to about how two-party systems work, about how it keeps extremist candidates out of the White House. So, yes, it sounds like a great idea. But when you really look into how it actually functions,
I've lived in Europe.
It's a disaster.
It doesn't sound like a great idea. Matthew, where can people get the movie, Safeguard?
The movie is on Amazon Prime. You can watch it right now. Safeguard, an electoral college story. If you have Amazon Prime, you can watch it right now for free.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, take out your pen. Write it down. Safeguard. You've got to watch that. That's for your viewing for after this show or tonight or whenever you have some free time. Safeguard. We have another great guest after the break. It's also Matthew Taylor to talk about his other movie. This is The National Pulse, and we'll be right back. I always wonder where the time goes. All right, we're at the end of the show here. One more segment with our very special guest, Matthew Taylor, a long-time friend of mine, although I'm not sure he'd want to be called that for his sakes. Running up in those liberal movie crowds, Matt, I don't know how you do it, by the way. You're a very tolerant human being. Matt, I want to roll this trailer of yours for the Riding the Dragon movie so that people can see it. Let's roll the trailer.
So what do we know? A 2013 trip to China getting new attention this morning, not for what Joe Biden did, but for who he brought with him.
Politics was a family business. When Joe did well, the family did well. Hunter's small firm got a deal that no one else had in China.
Unknown to the press back then, Hunter Biden was forming a Chinese private equity fund.
Hunter Biden's small investment firm announced a $1 billion private equity deal with the Chinese government. China is America's chief rival on the global stage, and nobody should know that better than Joe Biden. But Joe Biden talks about China differently.
China is not our enemy.
Not a problem. What are we worried about? Come on, man.
He doesn't see them as a threat. He welcomes their rise as a global power. Why exactly? Perhaps it's personal. Perhaps it's about his family. Perhaps it's about the money. But this isn't just another story about a politician's kid getting rich. Hunter's new firm started making investment deals that would serve the strategic interests of the Chinese military. This is the remarkable and largely hidden story of the secret financial relationship between the Biden family and the Chinese government. And it's a story that has been largely never told.
Matthew, I imagine watching your own trailer as a movie maker, watching your own trailer feels a lot like, Bruce Springsteen singing Born in the USA for the 3 millionth time. Sometimes it's an amazing trailer and it's an amazing movie. And it's one of those things where, look, a lot of people who know the story of Hunter Biden will sort of go, okay, yeah, I know that, I've seen that. But there are an awful lot of people who do not know the full story about what's gone on here. And are so many people out there in the country who need educating for this. So this isn't just a movie for people out there to watch, but it's a movie out there for people to share with their friends and family who are not necessarily up to their eyeballs in politics all day, every day. So we've got about 3.5 minutes left here in the show. Just tell us the impetus behind Riding the Dragon and how it all came together.
Well, look, Riding the Dragon came from this idea that Joe Biden has recently pivoted on China, saying that there are, he's become hawkish as he's run for president, but he has a pattern of helping his son, Hunter, basically do these deals that actually empower our greatest enemy, whether it's selling out our nuclear secrets with espionage, whether it's our, parts of our F-35s being stolen by the Chinese. These things have been facilitated by Joe Biden through his son. And the biggest problem is that one day China is going to come asking for payback. You don't give somebody $1 billion+ and then not say, hey, you owe us. And so the problem is they're going to owe him if he becomes president, which puts the United States, our chief executive, under the power of the Chinese because of money.
How come the media was so concerned about what Russia had over Trump, which turned out to be nothing, in 2015 and 16? But there's no talk about this. There's no reporters out there trying to put microphones in Hunter Biden's face.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I mean, clearly the media has a bias towards the president currently. But the other thing is that Joe Biden's been telling everybody for years that China should be our partners and they should rise and we should be equal. And so the media
not
clearly
bad
was
folks,
like,
folks.
yeah, hey, no big deal, right? And so you have the media has been pushed this narrative in one way, and there's also wants Joe Biden to become president, and they don't see the big deal. But the thing is that the threat is real. The Chinese have infiltrated everything. Thank you, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. And so they'll continue covering until this president that is currently sitting in the White House is gone, whether the Chinese are a threat or not.
Right. Matt Taylor, again, thanks for joining us. Just tell us where people can watch Riding the Dragon.
You can see it on YouTube for free. You can go to www.bidenfilm.com. And it's also broken into smaller segments if you just want to check out individual pieces.
All right, fantastic. Matthew Taylor, once again, thank you so much for joining us here on the National Pulse today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a whole host of great shows up next for you on America's Voice. Don't go anywhere. There's so much more going on today, and so much more in terms of those historic peace accords that we saw from the White House earlier on this afternoon. And also on the National Pulse website, we've got a whole bunch of stories going up, more related to the Transition Integrity Project. And who they're hiring as their PR firm. It's an exclusively LGBT, exclusively women, and Kamala Harris PR firm that they've hired to do their work for their nonpartisan, bipartisan group. You can check out that latest story that went live just before this show at thenationalpulse.com. And if you like our work, make sure you go to fundrealnews.com. We're grateful for the audience and the membership growing day on day on day on the National Pulse website. The other part of this morning, which really tickled me, is Joe Biden getting up on that stage in Tampa, accusing the president of not knowing what he was doing on a foreign policy stage around the world, and then mixing up Iraq and Iran and claiming that American troops, 6,000 American troops, had died in Iran and Afghanistan. That's Sleepy Joe Biden for you. We'll be back tomorrow with more National Pulse, 3 p.m. with me, Raheem Kassam. Natalie Winters joins us tomorrow. See you then.